I left the city, I've been proud. Treading water that they drown. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 163 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. And we got a great show lined up for you tonight. You know, he's no stranger to the podcast. My man, Dynasty Zoltan. How you doing tonight?
Good, man. What's up? Happy to be back.
Yeah, super excited to kind of talk about running backs here right now because we're getting closer and closer to the season. You know, I wanted to congratulate you. You know, your first Scott Fishbowl. Running back is obviously a key position in there. Tell me how excited you are for that particular experience, because it's like that first time you get that email, run me through what's going through in your head, because it's just so fun and exciting.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. I mean, first of all, just to be a part of like the biggest charitable event in fantasy football feels great. And then obviously you're doing it with a bunch of awesome people. It's a really cool format. I've been in some leagues that have attempted to kind of replicate real life impact. And I kind of feel like the Scott Fishbowl goes at that a little bit with all the fancy quarterback scoring. So should be a lot of fun. I'm excited. And I actually have a live draft here in Chicago. So that's going to be a good time to meet some other members of the community and whatnot.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm doing the live draft in Philly, you know, and I think it just adds every year. It's like, yeah, the first one I was in was Scott Fishbowl 9, and like every year it's grown and grown and grown to a point where it's like you get that email the first time, and then after you've done it for like 1 or 2 years, it's like seeing new people get that shot. You know, pretty much everybody in the Smash Accept crew has gotten an opportunity through the Patreon. We've had like 6 or 7 other guys who just through shout outs in there have gotten opportunities, and it's just like it's great to see everyone really getting their shot to play with, you know, fans and analysts alike, and you know, doing it for a great cause.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm excited for it to get going. I got a lot of research to do, but I'll get that going soon.
Yeah, and that's the thing with me with that particular tournament is like the first year I spent hours and hours and hours, right? Because you're so excited, and then it became like semi-stressful for it. And then for me, it's just been a matter of like, you know what? Like I really want to see what this looks like. Like I want to make sure I'm enjoying the process. You know, we talk about that a lot as far as how things go. Speaking of which, we had our Garrett Wilson giveaway, you know, and I got to give a shout out to my man Bill P from the Patreon. He decided, he said, you know what, Dad, I'm not a huge Jets fan. I'm not a Garrett Wilson guy, not big on memorabilia. Can you just send me a Smash Accept t-shirt? So we ended up sending him a Smash Accept t-shirt. He's thrilled with that. He said, let's give it back to somebody else in the community. So we took the 3 original guys that were on there, 5 more guys that were the first guys to tweet it out. So we're going to do a spin here live to see who wins that awesome Garrett Wilson jersey. I should have added Dynasty Zoltan to the list, you know, see if he can get in there. But here we go.
That's all good.
Oh, and my boomer moment here. Really? What is that? It's not spinning. All right. Well, we're gonna cover that later.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah. Let's just go with that. Let's talk about running backs. We'll edit that out there. I mean, what would it be without a little bit of editing? So what I want to talk to you about, and you and I, we've been talking a lot more, especially when you and I talk, is not just players. You know, we're not just saying player X, player Y. When it comes to the running back position, talk to me a little bit about your methodology. You know, I've been really encouraging people that are asking me questions about this player, that player in the Patreon and on Twitter to think a little bit deeper. Like, let's start talking about this running back position. What is your methodology? How do you attack the running back position when it comes to startups and when it comes to dynasty trades?
Yeah, so my overarching strategy, and I actually was on a podcast yesterday, the Dynasty Factory Tour with Paul Patterson, where we went over the running backs. And what I kind of came to during that discussion was you need to get one of the top 4 running backs or one of the top 5 running backs, because there are really only 4 guys right now who have elite production and elite like value for the long term. There are question marks for everyone else at the position. And then after you get like the guys at the back end of the top 12 are not people who you usually consider top 12 running backs. It really drops off a cliff. And then once you get out of the top 18 or so, I'm really focusing on production because the running back position, especially now, is so much of a year-to-year thing. And I know we're going to go through and touch on some specific backs, but you look outside of the top 18, you got guys like Damian Pierce and Cam Akers and Derrick Henry and Miles Sanders. None of these guys have any guarantee that they're going to have any role or any value next year. So I'm tending to go more towards production than I typically would at other positions because I don't see a whole lot of value upside for these guys because everything is just so uncertain.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like RB5 to RB12 is almost the exact same. And in years past, that hasn't been there because we've been gifted an amazing class from 2017 who are all starting to fade out and becoming extreme values in that production area. You know, guys like Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones and really starting to drop into that rounds like 8-9 range. And I'm with you. I mean, one thing I've always preached about the running back position is if it isn't an elite running back, I'm insulating.
Yeah.
Trade, Travis Etienne for Joe Mixon in a 24 first if it's in that mid-range, because you know what? I'm going to get similar production and I'm going to be able to buy a guy in that same range, as a Travis Etienne and kind of go into that area where I got two shots for one, because the other thing with running backs, it's such a volatile position as far as injuries go. You take a guy like Etienne, and I'm not trying to pick on him. He gets injured. Now all of a sudden you got to try to flip him or some other asset you have. Whereas if you insulate and you get another running back plus that first, that gives you two shots. Now all of a sudden he goes down, you buy another running back or something similar to that with the pick. So
yeah, and I think it's worth going over these 2020 and 2021 drafts in particular to talk about why the running back position is where it is, because these are the running backs who are entering their third and fourth year of their contracts. So we had last year, we had the Jacobs and Miles Sanders class, David Montgomery entering free agency. Sanders and Montgomery are now basically year-to-year guys. Jacobs is year-to-year for now. We'll see what happens. But if you go back to 2020 and 2021, we just have had such disappointments from these classes. So 2020, we know what happened with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. DeAndre Swift, already on his second team, traded for peanuts. Jonathan Taylor, all right, he's one of the guys. Cam Akers, major injury. J.K. Dobbins, major injury. A.J. Dillon's not that guy. Antonio Gibson, I'm sure we'll talk about, but he's not that guy. And if you look at 2021, we had the major injuries to Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams, and then it's basically just Najee Harris and I guess Ramondre from that draft class. So we've had 5 major injuries. We've had a few busts. Really, Jonathan Taylor, and you could argue Najee and maybe Ramondre are the only guys who have lived up to expectations coming from those draft classes where you expect those guys to be hitting their prime into the top 12 right now.
I love that because that kind of segues in. Ramondre Stevenson, I put a tweet out there. He was a guy that you and I were both buying everywhere last year. This time in February last year, I got him in the 11th round to the 12th round. Now he's going in that round 5 area. So when you're doing your drafts, when you're making your trades, we're trying to establish that next breakout, right? And sometimes it's a breakout for a guy that's, entering year 2. And then you got situations like the guys you were just mentioning. I mean, DeAndre Swift in a new situation, J.K. Dobbins now, seemingly healthy. Javonte Williams, someone that I think is a definite buy out there that has crazy upside. Cam Akers. I mean, who's that guy out of that group that you're like, you know what? I'm going to give him another shot. This is someone that I think, because if you're buying these guys, we talk about right now, Ramondre Stevenson, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard, those are your 5th round guys. But those guys you were mentioning, I mean, Cam Akers has fallen to the 8th round, J.K. Dobbins, late 6th round. These guys are starting to slip a little bit in their ADP, which is when you can start to, extrapolate value and make some of these trades.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I'll say, Ramondre was RB 36 on June 28th, 2022, and he is now RB 10. That type of leap for a non-rookie running back is incredibly rare. So I'm not counting on that for anyone. If I look outside the top 30 of my rankings, we're looking at like David Montgomery and Jalen Warren and Roschon Johnson. Like those guys are not going to be jumping up into that top 10, top 12 level. I think the easiest answer for me, if we're talking outside of the top 24, it's Kendre Miller. And he's not a guy I'm even that interested in. Like, I didn't love his tape. I don't love the situation, but it's really easy for me to see a path for him to get into maybe not the top 12, but maybe the top 15 where J.K. Dobbins is sitting. Because you look at his situation. Kamara, maybe he misses time, maybe he doesn't, but I'm going to assume he misses some time. Jamal Williams is really not an efficient runner. He got a lot of shine last year because of those 17 touchdowns, but you can't count on that to compete. I could see Kendre Miller shining from an efficiency perspective and entering next offseason as the presumptive RB1 in that offense and potentially getting a huge value boost at least before the draft. I'm not saying it'll last till after the draft, but he's a guy I'm targeting in, rounds 11 where he could be potentially getting a big boost.
I absolutely love that because in that tweet that I was referring to, I literally put the guys that I think that can absolutely mold into those guys that skyrocket. Like you and I last year when we were doing year one punts, I mean, it was, Amon-Ra and Devonta and Ramondre Stevenson, guys like that. And this one, I was looking at guys and you see those round 5 wide receivers, with your Christian Watson, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Judy, Burks, all those guys. The only running back I have on my entire list is Kendre Miller at the 9-10 because the rest of them, I mean, I'm looking at this and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, we talk about those top 5. Can any of them get into the round 3 discussion in the next year startup wise? I don't see it. Right now, the only guys going in that round 3 other than the top 5 you're talking about, I mean, there's Saquon, there's Christian McCaffrey. But, I mean, the rest of them, you look at round 4, I mean, it's Najee Harris, Austin Eckler, Travis Etienne. I mean, we're looking at an area where it's like someone's going to have to hit hard to get back up into that area with how young, the landscape right now of wide receivers is young and elite. The landscape of quarterbacks is starting to grow. I mean, when you have guys like Kyler Murray going QB 13 and Tua is in that 14-15 range, it's going to be a hard shot for one of these running backs to really get into that third round.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm working on, which I'm really excited about, is my 2024 look-ahead dynasty rankings. And this is an exercise that I've been doing for 6 years now. It's one of my favorite exercises because I will make more changes to my 2023 rankings because of these 2024 rankings. It really reveals a lot to me. And there are 3 guys, if we're looking not at the, RB 15 and later range, but just outside of the top 5 who I think could enter the top 3 rounds of startups. And that would be Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, and Javonte Williams. And I know for a variety of reasons people are down on those guys, but we should remember all 3 of those players are elite prospects. All 3 of those players have very good draft capital and have been very efficient runners when healthy. So Etienne, I know we're going to go in depth on Etienne later, so maybe I'll leave him for a little bit later. But Kenneth Walker, if he proves to be better than Charbonnet, he could easily be going back in that range. He was going in that range before the draft. Charbonnet could easily be just a guy, and Kenneth Walker could handle 70% of the touches. That would put Walker right back up into that range. Javonte Williams, same deal. If he comes back from injury, if he never got hurt last year, he'd be going in that third round right now. So those would be the guys I'd target as slight risers, but there's a lot of risk there for both of those guys. So I'm not saying that they're necessarily good values at cost, even though especially Javonte I think is, but hypothetically I could see those guys increasing to, top 40 dynasty status for overall.
Javonte Williams, what do you see for him? I mean, I know you've been working on projections and I keep seeing reports. Everyone wants to compare him to J.K. Dobbins just because, similar type injury, but not every guy heals the same. I mean, his injury was super early, and it's a spot where it's at least 9 months. He's past that area, but what do you have him projected for this season?
Yeah, so Javonte Williams, I mean, anyone who's been following me knows he's probably my favorite player I've ever scouted, just in terms of, I mean, I had guys like Bijan ranked higher than him, but just in terms of how much I liked him versus consensus. I'm very high on him this year because all of the reports have been glowing. He got hurt in week 4. He had received 21 targets in those first 3 weeks. Obviously, most of those were front loaded to the week 1, but he had 4 targets in week 2 and 5 targets in week 3. This offense is going to take some big steps forward. He no longer has Melvin Gordon to worry about. I'm really high on Javonte Williams for this year. I think he is a top 15 running back. And in redraft, you can get him down at like RB 29 just because of the injury. Listen, I don't care about the first month of the season. The way that I play Dynasty, I don't want to be the 5th or 6th seed anyways. So if not having Javonte Williams costs me one game early in October or September, that doesn't really matter. But I'm pretty confident by the end of the season, Javonte is going to be a top 12 weekly option. So I'm buying him pretty heavily in Dynasty because he's only 23 years old, a year coming off this injury. Like, the downside, you look at where a guy like Nick Chubb is in the 6th round, or sorry, DeAndre Swift in the 6th round, or J.K. Dobbins in the 6th round. That's Javonte Williams' floor after this year. And I already said his ceiling is the 3rd round. So I'm heavily invested in Javonte, and I really hope he pays off this year.
Yeah, and he's a screaming value right now in the mid-5th round is like RB 15. And I'm with you there. I mean, we talk about that on Smash Accept all the time. You want to be top 3, bottom 3. And I see people saying, hey, like I had someone literally approach me the other day, they're like, I got Charbonnet in a second for Javonte Williams. What do you think of that? And I'm like, the upside isn't there. The floor is not the same. Like, this is not the kind of move you make. When I talk insulated trades, I mean, I'm trying to buy Javonte Williams plus, like I'm trying to sell off someone that thinks they're getting a ton of extra production out of, say a Josh Jacobs or even Saquon Barkley and move and get Javonte plus, and really try to advocate moving in that direction. So, I just wanted to talk the methodology. I love, picking your brain on that kind of stuff. Let's talk about buys. I mean, who is that guy right now? You talked about Javonte Williams, and I'm assuming he's one of them, but who's another guy out there right now from the dynasty running back position that you're all in on, somebody that you're buying no matter what?
So I kind of got 3 groups here, and I'll touch on them all very quickly. So my number one buys are Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs. And I already mentioned I want some of these top 4 running backs. Bijan Robinson is just too expensive. I like Jonathan Taylor at cost, but he is 3 years older than Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall. So I'm buying Breece Hall quite simply because I think he might be the best running back in the NFL. I mean, he was first in basically every efficiency metric last year: explosive run rate, yards after contact per attempt, yards per route run, other than Derrick Henry, who ran like 12 routes. He was just incredible last season. And you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, you mentioned I've been doing my projections. I have Jahmyr Gibbs projected for the RB6 this year as a rookie. And that might sound extreme. That's pretty much what you get when you're a top 15 pick as a running back. You are an RB1 year 1. You have ridiculous upside. We've seen this time and time again where a first round running back as a rookie comes in the top 6 in the position. So I'm buying both of those guys. I've gotten Jahmyr Gibbs in 3 out of the 5 startups I've done since the draft, all in the 3rd round, and I am thrilled to get him there. If you're able to start your draft with 2 quarterbacks and Jahmyr Gibbs and then just load up on wide receivers, to me, that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, in Smash 9, I actually started out with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and then I somehow worked in there and got Breece Hall and Gibbs. So it's like, because in the rookie draft, he fell down. The 104 fell a little bit. So I'm with you because my number one running back buy. And when we talk about buys, I mean, there's elite buys, right? You're buying high on a prospect. There's that mid-level where you're in between, and then there's the buy low. And I think Breece Hall, you're both buying high and buying low, right? Because I think right now you're going in there and you're buying what I believe is going to be in the same tier as Bijan Robinson by the time the season's over. Like, if he doesn't have that injury, we're putting them as in their own tier by themselves, and they're up there. 97.2 yards from scrimmage per game with 5 touchdowns in just 7 games. And that's 15.4 fantasy points per game. But when you look at it, weeks 4 through 7, when they just decided, you know what, Michael Carter's not that guy, 21.2 fantasy points per week. And I know that's a small sample size, but if you look at how elite and how explosive he was during that time, 5.8 yards per carry, 4th in yards after contact, 4th in receiving yards. And then one thing that I've been looking at a lot, and I absolutely love his content, is Alex Caruso put out there. He was saying, running backs who have 80 plus receptions or 80 plus targets, right? They are a RB1 90% of the time. Like, it's almost every single time. And then you look at where he was at. He almost had, during that 4 to 7 week span, he was at 5 targets per game. You look at the touch rate. Again, another thing, 99 out of 100 running backs that had 270 plus touches are RB1s. He's a lock, and I got roasted the other day because someone put out there, hey, is Breece Hall a top 5 running back in 2023? And I said, he has RB1 ceiling if he's healthy week 1. Yeah. And everybody was like, "Oh man, you're just jumping too far into conclusions on that." The guy is absolutely special, but I'm going to start, going into a little bit of the health with this. But what would you be willing to pay to get Breece Hall? Because that's the question, right? Like, who are you moving? What kind of direction? Because trying to buy elite level running backs takes some skill. It takes some thought process. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to trade Justin Jefferson and move off onto a running back. That's not the process that you and I believe in. So how are we accumulating the assets? How are we making moves for those big names like Jahmyr Gibbs, like Breece Hall?
Yeah, so it's tough to do. I mean, one of the things that I'm focusing on is that, as I mentioned, those are two of the only 4 running backs who have any value security long term. So guys like Tony Pollard and Ramondre Stevenson and Josh Jacobs, who are players I really do like, I'm using those guys to get Breece Hall or Jahmyr Gibbs because I do believe that they're going to give you it's a value insulation trade in a different way, right? Because I think they're going to give you the same amount of, it's honestly a 2-way value insulation. You're going to get the same production in this upcoming year, and you have the additional longevity. So let's say you give up Tony Pollard and a first to get Breece Hall. The other side gets production year 1 and then gets your first. But I would rather just have production year 1 from Breece Hall and then have Breece Hall's next 5 years of his career. So those are some moves I could be looking to make. The other thing that I personally love doing, because I don't love giving up future firsts unless it's the really good trade, is I like giving up the tier of 27, 26-year-old wide receivers who are averaging 13, 14 points a game and not going to make a big difference for your team. So a guy like Michael Pittman, Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson, Christian Kirk, even like a Brandon Ayuk that I know people like for some reason the last month of Brandon Ayuk has been unbelievable. I'm happily giving one of those guys, maybe 2 of those guys for Breece Hall, or one of those guys plus like a running back like Rashad White or Najee Harris to get up into the Breece Hall tier. I have a question for you. You mentioned that Breece and Bijan would be on the same tier if they were healthy. I tweeted a week or so ago that I do have Breece and Bijan on the same tier and that the gap between them should not be that far. What would you pay? You have Bijan Robinson. The Breece Hall owner comes up to you. What are you asking for on top?
See, in actual rookie pick value, I'm thinking it's just a random 24-second. That's not how I would play it. Like, I would end up trying to go after and get another running back who I believe's in that area, or kind of a 2-for-1 kind of deal. And I think you can get it. I mean, I really think the Bijan hype was so much as it is. I mean, I had a guy yesterday ask me, he said, would you trade Gibbs? And would you trade Bijan Robinson for Gibbs and Anthony Richardson? I was like, I know 1 quarterback, not quite. He goes, nope, it's super flex. I'm like, smash that, dude. Go take it. Like, get that done. I think the Bijan Robinson, I don't ever want to say he was a sell. You and I did multiple podcasts talking about him, but I mean, he is priced at his ceiling. I love him. I think he's fantastic. But if you can get Breece Hall in a first for Bijan in a second, that's the way you win. That's how you get yourself into that position.
And I think you could do that. You might even just be able to get the first without giving up the second. I made 2 trades involving Bijan and Breece in the last week that I'd like to hear your input on. So I traded Bijan Robinson and Marquise Brown, and I got Breece Hall and Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Oh, I love that. I mean, Marquise Brown's one of my biggest sells just because of the way he's played in the past, and Kyler Murray's going to miss time. I think that's the way to do it. And I'm looking here on bulletproof.com. I love their work because you can start seeing all these different sleeper trades. And someone did something similar to that. Is like they traded Bijan Robinson and Chris Olave for Breece Hall and Jamar Chase. You're like, there's deals like that everywhere where I just people are not high enough on him. They just really aren't. To your point on some of those other trades, I mean, I saw it's Josh Jacobs in a first, Austin Eckler in a first, Tony Pollard in a first. I think if those firsts are mid, you're fine. If they're early, you're going to lose a little bit. But if they're late, you're killing it, man. Like, you are moving into an area like that. And then another trade similar to what we just talked about, as far as I like to call them 2-for-2 trades, where you're trying to upgrade twice but disguise it somehow. You know what I mean? Like, in your head, you're going to win twice, or at least break even on win and win in another. The guy gave up Josh Allen and Terry McLaurin. He got Trevor Lawrence and Breece Hall. Jeez. I think that is an absolute smash. I mean, you go into those situations, now you're you're absolutely killing it. Like Breece Hall is too cheap. I see another one here. Breece Hall and Amon-Ra St. Brown for Jamar Chase. Like that's a smash. Like you are getting so much value. That's why Breece Hall for me is one of my absolute biggest buys at the running back position as well.
No, completely agree. The second Breece Hall trade I made was I traded Bijan Robinson and Justin Fields, and I got Breece Hall, Deshaun Watson, and Jalen Waddle. So basically made 2 small downgrades and picked up a free Jalen Waddle.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, Deshaun Watson, I don't think people understand. And again, I did him as one of my biggest buy threads. He is going to be a top 8 quarterback, maybe a top 6 quarterback. I mean, this is a guy, when he played, was QB4, 3 years in a row? Like he's a top 5 quarterback. Now they're starting to put some weapons around him. The rust was shaken off for the last couple weeks last year. Like Deshaun Watson is the ultimate guy that I'm insulating back off of, where I'm trying to move off of Lawrence, Fields, and maybe not Herbert, but in that area and move back and get myself Deshaun Watson because he's going to get there, And I love when we just start going down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
I started talking Deshaun Watson, then the next thing I want to talk about is Kyler Murray, but we'll just keep going. Stick to the topic a little bit, But now at the running back position, those are the elite guys. Those are the guys you're going after there. I think you're right with Gibbs as well. I think Gibbs is still too cheap. Like most of the community, you have this fallout sometimes. Like rookie draft season is in May for most of us. It's May, early June. Now we get to almost July, and people start to try to find ways to pick apart where they don't think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be elite. They start to try to figure out situations to make those trades, start second guessing their rookie picks, after they already made them. And I think Gibbs is a buy as well. You got to go out there and at least see what the options are, because everyone's still coming back to the weight. And it's like, come on, stop. We've presented all the information. The draft capital matters. Everything that's happened there matters. He's an absolute smash buy.
And you mentioned guys who get that many targets, they just really don't miss. And Jahmyr Gibbs is a lock for 80 plus targets as long as he's healthy. You want to move on to the next tier of running backs?
I absolutely do. I'm looking at, so I'm going to skip over the middle tier because I think the middle tier is fun. I love having these guys, the Josh Jacobs, the Najee Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, Pollard. I think those guys for me are those, I'm comfortable with them. I think if I want to use them to tier up, I will, but I'm not really tearing down too much off of that group. That's a group that I think I'm going to play with the production. But what I'm really trying to do, and I'm doing it everywhere, is I'm trying to buy that production level. I've never done this to a point where I've always been, leery of trading for some of these guys. But the 2017 running back class was special. The first guy I want to talk about is Aaron Jones. I mean, you talk about guys going off an age cliff. We talk about Fournette, we talk about Dalvin Cook. Aaron Jones didn't have that last year. Aaron Jones had career highs in rushing yards, career highs in receptions with 59, 4 straight full PPR RB1 seasons. 5.3 yards per carry was the highest of any starter. And he's costing you less than a 24 first. And I understand that Aaron Rodgers isn't there now. And I understand it's Jordan Love. But again, last year with Aaron Rodgers was not a premium Aaron Rodgers. So, I mean, I think there's even a case to be made that Aaron Jones will get more carries now with Jordan Love. Aaron Jones could see more dump offs with Jordan Love, and I know there's a lot to be said in there, but the reason I'm buying is the cost. I think given the early part of his career when he wasn't getting 250 to 270 touches, he was in that 200 range because of the size, because of the platoon. I think this is a guy that's got plenty left on it, in his career, and you can get him dirt cheap. Like we talk about it all the time with James Conner, right? 2 years ago, you were buying James Conner for a second. James Conner's still worth a second. Yeah. Now Aaron Jones is in that area where it's like you can get him for an early second, and next year he's still going to be worth that unless something catastrophic happens.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, he had probably the best year of his career last year. Second in PFF rush grade. Josh Jacobs and Nick Chubb were the other two in the top 3. His consistency is remarkable. He's had between 52 and 61 receptions the last 4 years in a row, at least 3 yards after contact per attempt. And like you said, there's been no drop-off because we've seen some drop-off from Joe Mixon, from Dalvin Cook, from Derrick Henry. We have not seen that from Aaron Jones. And the situation is changing, but I don't know that it's necessarily that much worse for Aaron Jones. He's still going to get his 70-plus targets this year. And he's never been a big touchdown guy. He's only had 6 rushing touchdowns the last 2 years. The 2 years before that, he had 29 rushing touchdowns combined. So if he gets some of that rushing touchdown work back, which I think he should, because A.J. Dillon is just a guy, then maybe we see, another top 12 year from Aaron Jones. And at the cost of a mid-second, I like it, or in the 9th round of a startup.
Yeah, and like for me, it's about the reception work, like what he's able to do. I can see he was 59 receptions last year, but you look at it, RB7 in route run percentage, RB7 in slot snaps, RB2 is in wide receiver snaps at 48. Like they're going to move him all over the field. Like everyone's trying to figure out what Green Bay wide receiver to draft after Christian Watson. They're like, which guy's going to be which? I think Aaron Jones just picks up the slack, and I could see him easily having 65 to 70 receptions, which makes him a lock for an RB1.
Yep, no arguments here.
Do you have a guy in that range? I know we talk like production range, those guys that I'm willing to go out there and buy and, not pay a premium. Like put yourself in a position. You and I have talked, we've done multiple startup, podcasts talking to you about how to do this, getting those quarterbacks early, getting those wide receivers in rounds 3 through 5, and just smashing these running backs at absolute value late in the draft.
Yeah, so there's a few guys that really come to mind. You mentioned Aaron Jones. I'm passing on Dalvin Cook right now. The drop off was unbelievable last year, and we just don't know what his situation is going to be. The 2 guys, there's 4 guys. Really, all of the vets in this range I'm okay with. Maybe we talk about which we prefer. But Joe Mixon, James Conner, Alvin Kamara, and David Montgomery are all guys I'm targeting for their production, all guys available in the 9th to 11th round of startup drafts. I'm okay just taking the cheapest one because, like I said earlier, if you start a startup with 2 quarterbacks, you get Jahmyr Gibbs in round 3, or you trade up and get Breece Hall in round 2, then you can just smash wide receiver and tight ends all the way until round 10. And if your RB2, 3, and 4 are Kamara, Connor, and Montgomery, you're going to have more production than the people who were taking, DeAndre Swift in round 6 and Rachaad White in round 7. So I'm really happy with any of those guys. I found it's incredibly easy to tier down to those guys using a guy like Rachaad White or Cam Akers or Zach Charbonnet. Think about it. Who's going to have more production this year between those 3, 24-year-old guys and a guy like James Conner and Joe Mixon? It's going to be James Conner and Joe Mixon. Both of them have 17-plus point per game seasons in the last 2 years and basically have the same role. Meanwhile, you look at a guy like Rachaad White or Dameon Pierce, are they locked into any role after 2023? Absolutely not, right? So I'm going to take the production from year 1. And listen, even if James Conner retires on my roster, specifically for Connor, retires on my roster, if I traded Rachaad White and got Connor in a second, I get more production in 2023, and then I use that second to replace Connor next year. So I'm not worried about it, and then I can just trade that second for whoever falls off next year. So you can just keep on rolling back like this, and production at running back is too easy to get later on in the draft with some of these vets.
James Conner's the cheapest. I mean, 1101 ADP right now is RB35. And recently I just made a trade, and I think it echoes to what we're talking about, is I traded Charbonnet in a third for Joe Mixon in a second. I just think I'm in an area where Joe Mixon, that's my biggest buy out of that group is, and I know there was drop off in production. I know that. I'm not, trying to sugarcoat that at all, but he still finished as RB12 he was second in the NFL in carries inside the 10, but the touchdown production wasn't the same as it has been, And then you look at Samaje Perine gone, who they really haven't bring anybody really in to replace his role. Like, it was maddening to me. Joe Mixon is a very, very skilled wide receiver or running back with receiving skills, and Perine was that third down guy. So now Joe Mixon's definitely on pace to get, probably get more receptions. From RB5, or he was RB5 overall from weeks 9 to 18. I know that's really bloated because that one game, and a lot of people look at it and they say, hey, if you look at where he was at, Joe Mixon, in a few of the weeks really boomed, and then other of the weeks he wasn't in that RB1 territory. But I would rather have a guy who goes out there 4 weeks out of the year that wins me a week every single time, and the rest of them he's in that RB2 range, than a guy who he kind of teeters in that middle. Like, sometimes that explosive running back is where it's at. And I think, I got to bring up a couple trades that I made with Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
Now these were early. This was more March April kind of area. But I gave Austin Eckler and got Joe Mixon in a late 24 first. And another one is I gave Damian Pierce and got Joe Mixon in a 25 second.
Yep. And that Pierce trade is exactly what you're looking at, right? Because you can use Mixon's points this year, and then next year you could use that 25 second to go acquire, Dalvin Cook or Aaron Jones or whatever you want to do at that point in time. The thing about Mixon, like, there are 4 running backs who have put up 17 plus points per game the last 2 years. And it is CMC, Eckler, Derrick Henry, and Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon is the youngest of these guys, and he is going way later than these guys. I'm not saying he should be taken above Austin Eckler, but there is value to be had with Joe Mixon. And one of the things you can do with these guys is you can get them as a throw-in. So one thing that I did recently was I was in discussions with a league mate where I was trying to get Davante Adams by moving my 2024 first, which is projected to be pretty late. I was a little unsure. He was a little unsure. He wanted my second. I was like, all right, take my second 2, give me back James Conner and throw me back a third. You don't want James Conner. You're heading into a rebuild. So we got that deal done. And now all of a sudden I have Davante Adams and James Conner. I just got 36 points a game of production and basically just paid a first round pick.
That was the league you and I are in together, because I was talking to the same guy trying to get literally I was doing the same offer with different players. Like, we were both in that same wavelength going after the same guy who's like, hey, I'm offering this up. Davante went on the blocks, and you and I, like some hungry dogs, just like jumped on it. I think to your point, like, we're in this area where Derrick Henry is going at 603, but Joe Mixon is going in the 9th. At 903. Aaron Jones is in the 9th round. Make that make sense to me.
Derrick Henry, he's 2.5 years older than Joe Mixon. I don't get it.
Yeah. And he's had more carries. He's been, it's not like he's going into it. Joe Mixon is in a top 5 offense and he's going nowhere. Derrick Henry now finds himself in an offense where it's bottom 5. I mean, talent-wise, that offense is, yes, he's going to get a ton of carries as long as they're in the game. But how long is Tennessee going to, be in the fight and be able to use him? Everyone's like, what if he gets traded? Well, that's a big what if for a 29.5-year-old running back.
Yeah, and by the way, even more so, Joe Mixon has outscored Nick Chubb by almost 2 points a game the last 2 years. He is 6 months younger than Nick Chubb. Why is Nick Chubb going 4.5 rounds ahead of him? None of this makes sense to me. Like, if you're going to invest in hypothetical value upside, right, with a guy like Kenneth Walker or a guy like Javonte Williams or DeAndre Swift, I get it, right? Like, maybe I don't agree with the specific player, but there's some logic there. But if you just are going for production and this player is going to lose value year over year, like all of these 27 plus running backs are, then just go cheap. Get Joe Mixon. Don't get Nick Chubb.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about DeAndre Swift, because I put a poll out there with DeAndre Swift. Everyone, they're very polarizing. Like, some analysts have Fantasy Guru has him pretty high. He's a buy on him every time I see a tweet there. Other people, he's a stone cold sell. Like, it's like, move him off there. While I'm pulling up that data, talk to me a little bit about what you're doing with DeAndre Swift, because coming out of college was elite. He showed traits of being a rock solid RB2. But now he goes to Philadelphia after, a down year with Detroit. What's the situation here for DeAndre Swift?
Dude, I don't know. This one's tough. I loved DeAndre Swift coming out of college. Since 2019, he ranks 8th in my running back rankings according to my data model. Basically everything you would want to see from him, right? In college, he was elite in terms of his receiving ability. He was a pretty, 90th percentile targets per route run, 80th percentile yards after contact. Like, he was a good runner. But it's clear that DeAndre Swift is a guy right now that coaches can't trust. So I like that he's getting a second chance. He's entering a backfield with no one who is, Penny is pretty damn talented, but he's not going to last more than a week or two. Gainwell, the skills are redundant, and Swift is just better at it. So I completely get the case for why you should be in on DeAndre Swift. That being said, he's entering the last year of his contract. He just got traded for peanuts. If DeAndre Swift didn't see the field week 1, I would not be surprised. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but Philadelphia owes him absolutely nothing. And when you have Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, maybe sometimes it makes sense to go with the safer Kenneth Gainwell, who you know is not going to fumble or miss a block or run the wrong route, right?
He played really well in the playoffs. I was buying
did.
Kenneth Gainwell everywhere, going into the offseason, knowing Miles Sanders was going to be gone. Is DeAndre Swift the Trey Lance of the running back position? Like, I get asked the question all the time. Like, you can't undersell either of these players, and you're not going to get what you want now, so they got to be holds until you find the right situation. I'm going to run down some of these trades, that were in the poll. I want to get your idea here. DeAndre Swift or Rachaad White in a 24 third.
If you had said second, I would have gone with the pick, but I'm a stick with Swift for now. I mean, by the way, they're the same age. I think they were born like 12 days apart, Swift and White, even though it seems like they're years apart. So just something to keep in mind there.
DeAndre Swift or everyone's least favorite or favorite wide receiver to talk about, George Pickens?
Swift. I'm low on Pickens.
63-37. I was surprised. I'm very low on Pickens too, and I think, all right, we'll go Jameson Williams or DeAndre Swift. I tried to purposely pick guys that I was low on to make it kind of work out.
Yeah, this one's a tough one. I think I might go Jameson Williams here, even though I'm low on him, because think about the best case scenario for both of these guys. Like DeAndre Swift is not going to hit, top 4 round startup value anytime soon because his contract's not locked in. He's not going to get a bell cow role, even if they end up trusting him with some of the work. Jameson Williams could burst. He could be a top 10 wide receiver by week 5 for all we know. So I'll take the swing on Jameson, but it's a close one.
Yeah, I would be selling immediately then too. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And how about Superflex, Jared Goff, DeAndre Swift, and then also in a Superflex, a random first or DeAndre Swift? I'm
taking the random first every single time.
I am too. Twitter was all over that 76-24, and I'm with them.
Yeah, Jared Goff's a little bit tougher. If I knew I could then move Jared Goff for something I liked better than Jared Goff specifically, I'd probably take Goff though. It's just harder to get a quarterback, right? Like I know I would rather take Goff and then trade my second for Aaron Jones.
I like it a lot. Now, you said there's a third area of buys. So we talked about the production. Who are those other guys, and what's that third area for you?
Yeah, so the third area of buys are the really, and I'm ignoring the rookies because we all know that rookie running backs have opportunities. For me, it's the backups. It's the handcuffs. Like these handcuffs. Listen, I already talked about what to do in the first 10 rounds or so of a startup. You could probably tell I've been working on my startup guide, which has been quite the ordeal, but it's been a lot of fun to write and very revealing for me. Once you hit round 15 or 16, there is nothing valuable at any position other than running back and maybe tight end. Like you look at the wide receivers in this range, DJ Chark, Zay Jones, Michael Gallup. These guys might get 800 yards, but that is absolutely worthless from a fantasy perspective. So go take Jaylen Warren and Chase Brown and Elijah Mitchell and Malik Davis and Keontae Ingram and Jerome Ford. And I can go on. Any running back who is the clear number 2 on their team, you could flip them for a second round pick at any day when someone gets hurt. And that's what I want to target in those rounds.
I know we talked about that when I jumped on your pod, like that got me starting to think. So, I'm looking at how do I go about, I'm always trying to draft in my startups for value. And the only wide receivers that I'm seeing from rounds like 10 to 15 that I don't want to take one of these running backs over was Bateman in the 10th, Elijah Moore in the 11th, Sky Moore in the 13th, Rondale Moore in the 14th, and Nico Collins in the 15th. And I think you and I talked about, I mean, if I got to choose between Cedric Tillman and Samaje Perine, or if I got to choose between, we're at a spot where Jaylen Warren or Juwan Johnson, you're like, what are we even thinking about? And Jerome Ford even goes even later. It's like these guys hit the field and they're going to put up points. Like they're literally going to be someone that you can flip there. I mean, you got other choices like, do I take Jacoby Brissett or Gus Edwards? Do I take KJ Osborne or Chuba Hubbard? Like these are just guys that load them up. I was looking at one of my rosters today, and if you look at my wide receiver core, it's Garrett Wilson, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and I believe JSN. And then you look at my running backs, and I think I have Aaron Jones and Joe Mixon, but then I have all of these guys, like literally all of these guys. And that's been such a recipe for success for me because it's like one of these guys is going to get injured when I don't want, like one of those main guys on your team. I used to invest heavily in these mid-level running backs like we talk about. They're going to go down to injury, and Zamir White's going to win you a championship because
Totally.
Josh Jacobs isn't playing. I lost to too many guys starting scrubs. Like, I could not stand it when a guy was starting Deontay Foreman and, Latavius Murray and beating me when I had Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. It drives you nuts.
Right. I mean, anyone in this range, you're not going to want to start no matter what. So in what scenario are you going to want to be starting Isaiah Hodgins, right? Like if you're a good team, there is no scenario, and there's no scenario any good team would want to start him. So you're never going to be able to flip him for a second round pick. One of my questions I have for you, how do you go about acquiring these guys? Because, like, let's say it's not a startup, just in a trade, because I think that's a very useful piece of advice for the listeners, because you can't just go up to the Keontae Ingram owner and say, here, have a 4th round pick for Keontae Ingram. Because first of all, why would they do that? So you're going to have to overpay, because now they know that you want him specifically. So how do you go about getting these guys?
So you're absolutely right, because you can't say, what would you want for, this player? Like, all of a sudden radar goes up. Okay, he really wants Jaylen Warren, right? Like, why does he want him? Let's try to think of this out. They're going to end up overcharging you. So what I try to do, there's a couple different ways, but like, for instance, I'll start looking at ADP. I'll start looking at wide receivers. I'll look at that 7th round right now. I love Chris Godwin. I'm not a Zay Flowers kind of guy. So maybe I have Zay Flowers and I would rather have Chris Godwin to get the production in there. And I say, hey, you know what? And in a lot of people's minds, they're still in on that youth. Hey, you're a little bit younger. This running back's not going to do anything. Give me Chris Godwin and Jerome Ford, and I'll give you Zay Flowers. And it ends up being they think they're getting a win. I'm getting in that area. And you might have to then throw in that 3rd round pick that you were going to pay for that player, but you end up getting him anyways. You almost have to. You and I played chess when everybody else is playing checkers. So it's a matter of just trying to figure out how to make those kind of moves, because you can't just get them one for one. There are always guys that are, thrown into a deal. Like, I'm going to pull up Jaylen Warren trades right now, but I mean, they're all like, some guy paid a 25-second for Jaylen Warren. Horrible process. Don't do
but
that.
That's if someone came up to me and said, what do you want for Jaylen Warren?
That's what I would say.
Second. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I get how that happened, but what you're saying is completely right. Like, you move within a tier, or let's say you trade. Listen, I would trade Nick Chubb for Joe Mixon in a second and then ask for Jaylen Warren in there, right? Like,
as an add-on.
In a bigger deal, they're going to ignore it.
Yeah. And you make that move where you don't have Jaylen Warren plugged in. You say, you know what, if I made that move, it's a win. But then I'm going to try to get Jaylen Warren thrown in at the end. Some of the other trades I'm looking at, someone traded Chase Claypool for Jaylen Warren. I'm fine with that. Like, I'm out on Claypool. Another guy traded Ty Chandler in a 25 third. Yeah, I want Jaylen Warren for that, because I don't think Ty Chandler is the answer. Another guy, like some of these other ones, I'm not a huge fan. He gave up a 25-second for Jaylen Warren and Ty Chandler. Another guy gave up Puka for him. Like, you can take in the rookie draft is a great time to do these kind of things, because everybody wants, I guess Zach Evans is a bad example, but everybody wants a shot on Cedric Tillman, Kayshon Boutte, like start to, cash out on some of those guys who we know what happens with round 4 draft capital wide receivers or later. It's a very uphill climb. So I'll give you that. And you throw me Jaylen Warren and, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so we've mentioned Jaylen Warren a bunch here because he's just like a good prototype. Is there any other players in this range that or any backups that you're particularly targeting more or less than others?
I'm looking right now. Obviously I love the rookies. Bigsby at RB 39, Tajay Spears at RB 41. I like Antonio Gibson low-key at RB 38, but his value's starting to kick up a little bit more than what I want to see. I love Damian Harris in the 14th. Rashad Penny, Elijah Mitchell in the 14th. P-Ron goes in the...
Elijah Mitchell is one I absolutely love. 2 years ago, he averaged 15 points a game. Mm-hmm. Christian McCaffrey, I just saw an injury index that had him as the 3rd most likely player to get injured. You want a guy where if the starter gets hurt, you can put him in your lineup and know he's going to smash. So I like Elijah Mitchell there a lot.
And then, I'm looking at some other ones. We already talked about Warren. I think, it's tough to figure out who it's going to be for the Chiefs, but I'll take Jerick McKinnon because he seems to be the cheapest. I'm looking at, the 19th round you can get Leonard Fournette and Zamir White. I think Leonard Fournette is going to sign somewhere, and he's in that area. But I mean, you and I have talked about Zamir White before. I think there's just so many low-key, cheap options. Pierre Strong, I don't love the player, but he's cheap right now. I know he's probably a sell now.
No, I was going to say 20th rounder later, Pierre Strong, Keontae Ingram, and Malik Davis. I mean, you look at Keontae and Davis in particular, James Conner gets hurt all the goddamn time. The Cardinals have no one else, and they've been known to give their guy bell cow status. And I liked Keontae Ingram's film, obviously, more than the NFL did, but he's a potential guy to look at. Malik Davis splashed a little bit last year. Tony Pollard is not a guy who's going to get all of the workload. So we could see Malik Davis get some standalone value even, because Ronald Jones is not keeping anyone off the field. So that's another guy I'd look to invest in as well.
And I'm seeing like Malik Davis in a third, for Daniel Bellinger in a fourth. Malik Davis,
Sure.
Like for a 24-4, a pair of 24-4s, like I'd do that all day. Like that's the kind of move that I use my fourths for, those kind of things, and I look at other, I know it's really deep, but like with these guys, you pick up, say, Zach Moss, and you get him in the 25th round, right? Jonathan Taylor doesn't really have a premium backup there. I mean, it's Evan Hall. It's nothing. He gets an opportunity. He had 2 weeks last year where he was a serviceable RB2, that you're getting him in the 24th round. And guess what? If you got to cut him, it doesn't hurt at all, right? You're not like, we all want these wide receivers. We look at them in the draft process. We all want to be right on that. Like Puka was a perfect guy, or Trey Palmer. Like we want them to be that guy that hits. And guess what? When they hit, you're like, oh, I won. Yeah, like I predicted this, right? How often does it happen? No, they end up like falling off. And then you hold on to them more than you do a running back who falls down the depth chart.
And the thing is you can get some of these guys in free agency. So I'm just flipping through my leagues right now. I'm in about 65 sleeper leagues. Zach Moss is available in about 10 of them. And all of my leagues have 30 plus roster spots. So there are people who are rostering these roster clogger wide receivers who you are absolutely never going to start instead of a guy like Zach Moss. So go check out your waiver wire. I guarantee you one of the names that we mentioned is going to be available, even if it's one of the less sexy ones. Just try to get some number 2 on a depth chart at running back, because it's going to be more valuable than some team's wide receiver 5.
Yeah, and I'm even like every now and then I'm looking at the RB3. I mean, I've always liked D'Ernest Johnson. I think he's in a situation where if Etienne or Bigsby were to go down, he fills into that spot. I mean, these are the kind of, I call them insurance pieces or lottery tickets that mean so much more than your wide receiver 19, where you're trying to invest in a guy that, just isn't going to happen. I mean, I'm looking at D'Ernest Johnson goes in the same spot where Matt Corral or Xavier Valade or, like guys that I'm just never going to play him. And if I got to cut him, I'm not worried about it. So I love that you and I have been onto that for years. And I love that we can, share that with the community. I hate it for my Smash leagues because literally I can't get any of them. Like they have become some of the most difficult leagues because everybody's like, well, you pretty much lay out the blueprint every week. We know who you're going after.
That's true, man. It can be tough when you're in leagues with all your listeners, but these are champagne problems.
Yeah, hey, absolutely. So if there's any other running backs here, because we hit on a ton. We hit on the way that the way that we value the players, the way that we play on. How do you look at age versus production? Because I think when we're talking about Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones, but then you see all these guys that the Isaiah Pacheco's and the Khalil Herberts and Tank Bigsby, Brian Robinson, those guys all go slightly above them. How do you look at that elite young production? We know what to do with that, right? We know how to value that. That's early. But then we just like, oh, well, he's younger, so I'm going to go that way. Because, I mean, I had someone the other day tell me A.J. Dillon's a better bet than Joe Mixon. And I said, why is that? And they're like, because he's younger. And I'm like, by a year. Like, that's not something that we're looking at where it's like 25.1 versus 26.7 in age. I'm not buying A.J. Dillon over that. Like, Joe Mixon is the starter.
Yeah, so running backs who are not elite, so not Derrick Henry, not Nick Chubb, not Kenneth Walker, who do not catch passes, are utterly useless. So I'm talking Isaiah Pacheco, Brian Robinson, A.J. Dillon. These guys are absolutely useless. So they have no job security. They have no production upside. It is incredibly easy. Listen, if you have 5 backup running backs on your squad, any given week, 1 or 2 of them are going to be the starter because the starter's hurt. So you're not going to be playing A.J. Dillon because you're going to be playing Malik Davis that week or Jerome Ford that week because Nick Chubb's hurt. So having a guy like A.J. Dillon or Brian Robinson is absolutely pointless. Isaiah Pacheco is a massive sell for the same reason, just because he doesn't catch passes. He didn't do it in college, didn't do it his first year in the pros. He's in a crowded backfield, even though it's not the most talented one. So I am all about trading those quote unquote younger guys for veterans who are going to give me more production. I think particularly at the running back position, this is like incredibly actionable, more so than at other positions, because the reason to invest in youth is because you're either going to get production down the line, or for me, it's you're going to get value down the line. In what scenario does a guy like Isaiah Pacheco or A.J. Dillon increase his value to a meaningful amount? It's just not going to happen because they don't have that 3-down upside.
Yeah, and I think that's also on the same level the reason why we want, Jahmyr Gibbs, who's 21 years old, Breece Hall, who's 22 years old. That's going to maintain their value. Looking at a guy like Pacheco, yes, he's young, but right now the fact that he goes ahead of Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and Devin Achane, it is just baffling to me. Those guys. So speaking about Achane, because that's someone I'm getting questions about all the time. I just got an offer from Mung, 224 seconds for him right now. Like, I have Achane and I'm like, I'm a contender. So what do we do here right now? Because there's a window here. Dalvin Cook's rumored to go to Miami. My thing with him is he's always been projected as a Tony Pollard type running back. He was never going to get 35 touches or anything like that. He's going to be 10 to 15 touch guy. So why are we selling him right now?
Yeah, no surprise. We're on the exact same page here. I mean, it makes no sense. Listen, Dalvin Cook handled a really big workload in Minnesota. I didn't do great with it the last year, especially, but what's the point of drafting Devon Achane? You're not expecting 300 touches. Like you're saying, I don't care if Jeff Wilson takes the touches or Raheem Mostert takes the touches or Dalvin Cook takes the touches. You're hoping that Achane gets 8 to 12 touches a game. Maybe, 12 is probably on the upper end, especially year one. He flashes enough year one to be going into the league next year as a starter in year 2. And Dalvin Cook is not signing a 2-year contract. That's for sure. So Achane's a guy I'm investing in. And pretty happy about it. And like another guy in that range, if you're looking for a cheaper, youngish option, like I'm taking Rashad White over Dameon Pierce. It's likely that Dameon Pierce is a better football player than Rashad White. It's likely that he outscores Rashad White. But if you're just looking at the upside, Dameon Pierce does not have it and Rashad White does. So if you're not going to be investing in actual production at this level, you want to invest in someone who could actually hit that 15 plus point per game mark, which only, 12 to 14 running backs hit a year.
And Rashad White has that. I mean, you look at Baker Mayfield in dump offs per game and passes to the running back was, I know it's a small sample size again, but was number 1. Rashad White has 70 reception type upside. I think that isn't out of the realm of possibility for him to be a back end RB1 where these other guys would have to do so much more. Speaking of Achane, I'm looking at trades, they're going to blow your mind right now, but Cade Otton in a 24-second, Antonio Gibson straight up. I'm looking at, Brandon Ayuk for Achane in a first. I just don't understand these. You just drafted him at 110 to 201, and now you're like, nope, I don't need him. Let's just move off of this. Adam Thielen in 2/4 for Devin Achane. What are you guys doing?
Unbelievable. And people forget that Rashad White was actually a pretty dang good prospect. He was obviously a late breakout, but let's take a look at the top 6 running backs since 2019 in terms of target share. These are only guys drafted in the top 3 rounds. We got Rashad White, then Jahmyr Gibbs, Antonio Gibson, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, and DeAndre Swift. White is number 1 among those players, and it was at a big school. So there is a lot of upside to a guy like Rashad White. Mind if I change the subject quickly?
Let's do it.
We touched briefly on ETN earlier, and I know that this could be a long discussion.
I know,
similar to DeAndre Swift, I'm a little bit part of me really wants to buy him, but I see the reasons why to sell him. Can you give me your opinion on Etienne right now?
Yeah, I'm going on Football Guys tonight with Kluge, and he's one of my sells. I think a lot of reasons because of, you look at what he would with no real RB2. James Robinson was out of the picture. He was what, RB17 on the season. Now you bring in Tank Bigsby. It's not like they were passing like Cincinnati was and going with Chase Brown in the 5th. We're talking about Tank Bigsby with some draft capital. He's definitely going to eat into some of those red zone looks. He's definitely going to, Tank Bigsby's going to eat into some of those third down looks, some of that PPR work. And I just think the way we have him priced right now, and the community's come around a little bit. Like he was RB5 there for a while. He's fallen down to what I believe he's like RB7 now, and he's a lot more affordable. But I'm in an area right now where I am willing to sell, and it's got to be. I think I like to take a running back, like I was talking about selling Austin Eckler was one of my biggest buys, and I'm trying to move down. I'm trying to get myself into that area where I can get the production and the first round pick. I'm not just giving them away.
Yeah, I get it. It's an interesting situation because he came out of college and there was this perception among mainly the data guys that he was this big pass catcher because I think he got 40 plus catches his last year.
Well, he went back. He went back just for that. Like he did not have I believe he had like 13 the year before that. Like it was very minimal, and he went back to try to prove that he could do that. And then I think what we ended up having with Urban Meyer was like, oh, we're going to make him a wide receiver. So everyone thought he had the kind of pass catching chops we talk about with Jahmyr Gibbs.
And he just doesn't have that, right? He put up the raw numbers, but even in terms of what type of passes he was catching, he was not doing it at any type of elite level. So if we go back to 2020, which was really his like receiving breakout year, Travis Etienne only had two catches more than 10 yards down the field. Meanwhile, he had 30 dump offs in the middle of the field and another 15 below 10 yards. So he wasn't a guy who was getting targeted down the field like a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs was. On the other hand, Etienne is an incredible runner. He really impressed me. I thought he was much better than I expected, particularly with his change of direction. I mean, I know Snoog posted a really good thread earlier today about Etienne. He's one of the guys that's really on him. Ranks top 10 in terms of yards per attempt, yards after contact per attempt, points per touch, a whole bunch of things. He has the home run ability. Kind of reminds me of Kenneth Walker as a runner in a way. I think that he's being a little bit slept on because people look at his target share last year, which was just terrible. You can't argue that. And Tank Bigsby has a decent receiving profile, but I don't think that Etienne's just going to give up that third down role. I think he's just a much better player than Bigsby. I think he's a more explosive athlete. And listen, you can succeed. Josh Jacobs is not a good receiver. Derrick Henry is not a good receiver. But these guys have been putting up big receiving numbers, especially last season, because you can do it off dump offs. Ramondre Stevenson is going to get 85 catches this year on dump offs. So
I was going to ask about Ramondre Stevenson. So if they come to you, you're not going to get a first separation, but if you could get Ramondre Stevenson in a second or Etienne, which would you choose right now?
So I have Ramondre considerably higher in my projections, and they're only a year apart. Etienne does have the injury history.
That's where
it's tough.
Stevenson's still a decent value with where he's at.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is I think Etienne is a little bit higher than where he needs to be right now. And if you look at who you're passing up, I mean, he's going one pick before Drake London right now. And if I'm building my dynasty team, there's no way I'm even considering, a running back that we're talking about. That is he a buy? Isn't he a sell, right? Like if I'm investing in a running back in the top 4 rounds, he's got to be an absolute smash for me. And he's going right in the same area as JSN, Drake London, DK Metcalf, and Devontae Adams.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, there are leagues where I drafted Etienne in the middle of the 4th round, and I am okay with him at that value. But just because Ramondre's not going much later, he's going at the 501.
Yeah.
Tony Pollard's going at the 504. There's not that much value. Like, if you want a running back in the top 5 rounds, you kind of just need to, it's okay to take Etienne half a round before Ramondre. But I think the trade market would ask for more. So from that perspective, I'm okay with it. To me, the real guy that you don't want to draft because of opportunity cost is Saquon Barkley. I know he's a name that I don't think we've mentioned this entire podcast. he is the worst cost investment in Dynasty right now. He makes absolutely no sense to me. You could get Saquon Barkley, or you could get Jahmyr Gibbs, or CJ Stroud, or Kyle Pitts, or T. Higgins, or Mark Andrews. Like, it makes no sense to me because Saquon has not put up an elite season since his rookie year, right? Like, his bounce back season last year was the same thing Joe Mixon's been doing 3 years in a row, and they're the exact same age. So Saquon Barkley is a guy that I'm avoiding like the plague. I think I would maybe rather have Tony Pollard or Ramondre Stevenson than Saquon, and they're being drafted 2 rounds after. So I know that's a bit of a side note, but I think the Etienne's discussion versus Ramondre, it's similar to like Garrett Wilson versus Chris Olave, where I do think that Etienne's better than Ramondre. I understand why he's more valuable, but if you can get a legitimate plus to make that quote unquote downgrade, it's a great move to do. And that's why when I say sell Garrett Wilson, people come at me. It has nothing to do with what I think of him as a player. I think he's excellent, but it's just that you can get an almost as good player or potentially as good player a round and a half later. So that's where the whole Etienne moving up into early round 4 would make me a little bit uncomfortable.
And Garrett Wilson has not just gone 1 round above him, and London and Olave were all in that similar area. And we knew Aaron Rodgers was going to be the quarterback. Like the writing was on the wall. Now he's going, like if I look at ADP right now, I mean, I said the other day, I saw Jalen Waddle and a 24 first. Garrett Wilson's going 204. Drake London's going 404, which means you get at least a first, if not more on top. And now Chris Olave is going 211. Like these guys went from early 4th round steals to 3rd round decent values to almost at their ceiling. You know, like people are coming to me and like, hey, you know, if I can get Jamar Chase, if I give up Jamar Chase and get Garrett Wilson in a first, is that good insulation? No. Like it's just not anymore. Like you're not going to get to that area. He would have to be phenomenal. And I do think he's in that top 5 to 8 conversation year in and year out here for the next couple of years, but like you're pricing him out as opposed to Drake London, who's, you know, we haven't seen the QB upgrade, but his value now is 2 rounds later.
Yeah, and you're doing it for a 39-year-old quarterback who turns 40 in the middle of the season, who's probably was high on ayahuasca when he made his decision to go to New York. Like, how long is he going to be the quarterback there? And are we really boosting up Garrett Wilson 2 rounds because of it, or 1 round? I mean, the simplest way to look at it is if you have the 404 and the 204 in a startup, you could walk away with Garrett Wilson and Daniel Jones, or you could walk away with Drake London and Deshaun freaking Watson, or Anthony Richardson, or Kyler Murray. Like, come on, guys. What are we doing here?
I love how much we're in tune on those kind of things, because somebody actually told me that the other day. At the 202, they wanted Garrett Wilson. I said, is Deshaun Watson there? And they said, yeah, but I don't want him. I'm like, do you want Deshaun Watson and Drake London, or do you want, you know, in that same situation? Then it panned out. He took Watson, got it done. Hey, It was a pleasure, like always. I know we could talk for like 6 hours, but that's a long podcast. Why don't you tell everybody what you're working on here, and we'll close things out.
Yeah, man. Doing some fun stuff as always. Dynasty Sultan podcast. Dad's been on it a few times, of course, recently. So definitely make sure to check that out. And then my Patreon, a lot of fun stuff going on, a lot of activity in the Discord. And then I've been working hard on both my 2023 projections and my startup guide. The startup guide has become a behemoth, but it's been a lot of fun. Probably going to be like 120 pages, but it's going to give you everything you need to know to dominate your startups. Goes through all the different strategies, you know, win now, punt strategies. It's got like 10 pages on every position for how to address it. So basically all that we were talking about here condensed into writing to try to help you guys dominate your startup drafts.
You should get that thing like narrated on one of those apps by Morgan
Freeman. One of those audio books.
I would listen to it then, you know, like get it out there. You know, no, that's great, because you and I have really, that's one thing startups you and I have been talking about a lot, and, you know, line up there. So yeah, guys, we similar type things going on with us, but I thank you guys for tuning in and enjoy the process.